Hello everybody, welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Daniel Gormali. I'm a Grandmaster from England, and today I wanted to review another chess book. It is called, hold it out to the camera, it's called Masterpieces and Dramas of the Soviet Championships, Volume 1, 1920 to 1937 by Sergei Voronikov, and it's published by the same publishing company that I reviewed a book for the other day, Elk and Ruby. So I did buy some books on TikTok. Sorry. I've got TikTok on my mind, right? Maybe you can buy books on TikTok. I bought a book on eBay, and this is one of them. It's got a foreword by Garry Kasparov, so you only have to go a little bit into the book. And there's a foreword to the English edition, Chess in the Context of Time, by Garry Kasparov, written in New York in July 2020, which presumably was during the lockdown, so he had plenty of time on his hands. He probably couldn't go anywhere without a mask on. And Gary mentioned, what did he mention? He did actually mention David Bronstein, I believe, in this introduction. Let's have a look. Most of the games are annotated by the players themselves. So here's a text. Some of the text to go further on. Some more text here. You can see like the pictures and so on. There's a picture here of Alexander Ilyakin in the some of the. I must admit, it's not a full review, this, in a way, because I haven't read the entire book. But I feel like I've read enough to make some kind of comment on it. Yeah, so where does he mention... Oh yeah, and then Sergei gained experience of chess analysis when working with David Bronstein on their book Secret Notes. I should try and get that book. I mean, David Bronstein is very famous for... well, very famous for many reasons, but very famous for writing this book, I believe, on the 1953 candidates, which I believe that was in Zurich, right? It's one of the most famous chess books of all time. And is also mentioned by the author, Sergei Voronikov, in the introduction. He mentions, it's such a pity that David Ivanovich Bronstein won't see this book. His ideas demonstrated an amazing ability to grow through the lava of time. Don't quite understand what that means, but I see the flow of time, right? Because lava flows and it's fiery, and yeah, it's got some kind of spark to it. I remember sitting at his kitchen and him showing me one of his games from the Soviet Championships. So I believe David Bronstein lived in Moscow. I'm not sure where he was from originally, David Bronstein. Just want to actually mention that as a sort of, because I actually met David Bronstein, so it's interesting. He was mentioned both in the foreword by Garry Kasparov, who I believe helped him a little bit for his book, The Sorcerer's Apprentice. And he was also mentioned by the author, who's also written a book with David Bronstein. So David Bronstein was one of the most famous Soviet grandmasters. I played some blitz games with David Bronstein, because when he stayed in London, he would stay with Peter Hannon and Rosemary Hannon, who lived in Charlton Village. And he would come along to Charlton Chess Club because he loved chess, right? And Peter Hannon was a member of Charlton Chess Club. So that's how I got to meet David Bronstein, and I played some games with him. And he was a very creative player, obviously a very strong player. You could tell that he was of that World Championship level. He had an amazing natural ability for chess. And I was actually the captain of the Charlton, even though I was young at the time, I was probably only about 16, something like that. I was like enthusiastically the captain of the Charlton London League team. And David came along with us. So we were driven there by Alan Hanrek to Bishopsgate, and myself, and we were driving along, and we got David played on board one. His ECF grade was listed at about 230, which obviously doesn't quite give, you know, the history of what he was, what he represented, obviously of that era, of that famous Soviet domination era. He played a match with Mikhail Botvinnik, the patriarch of Soviet chess, and he drew that match, but he lost because in those days the rule was if you won the title, you would if you drew the match as the world champion, you would retain your title. I believe actually Botvinnik himself was the one who brought that rule in, possibly. It was certainly brought in the rule about the rematch. You'd instantly get a rematch because he used that rule when he lost to Mikhail Tau, and then he almost immediately regained his world title, I think the following year, or maybe a couple of years after, I can't remember. But anyway, yeah, so Bronstein came along, he played against Wood Green, and that was how Charlton ended up winning the London League, because David Bronstein, along with people like Neil MacDonald, Philip Morris, myself, we had a very strong team. David Bronstein was on board one. He played against Malcolm Payne. I believe the game was a Grunfeld defence. I think David was actually black in that game. I could be wrong. He won that game against Malcolm. I do recall it was a Grunfeld, and I think it was a variation where you play an early bishop c4 as white. You put the knight on e2, and then you put the rook on c1. You don't castle kingside, you go h4, because that was a very popular line at that time. So Malcolm would have known that from his column. He used to write, you know, still does possibly, he used to write for Daily Telegraph. Anyway, I lost in that same match to David Friedgood. There were quite a lot of Jewish people actually playing in that match. Sorry, I don't want to sound anti-Semitic or anything, but so basically it was like, you know, these 3 people involved in sort of like 4 people involved in these 2 games, right? This game, Malcolm Payne's Jewish. Obviously, David Bronstein was famously Jewish, and David Friedgood was also Jewish. I lost to David Friedgood, and then I remember when we were walking back to Alan Hanrek's car, David Bronstein suddenly launched into this tirade against me and started he started almost screaming at me. You played too quickly, you know, and I was shocked. I was like really angry actually that he was talking to me like this. But it's funny that he actually, basically, in that game, he was obviously taking notice of what I was doing. And he reckoned I played too quickly against David Friedgood, which I did. But it's funny that he nailed on the head my primary weakness in chess, which probably no player ever before or did since then, other than myself, who probably I could recognise this myself, that my primary weakness is being an impulsive player. Anyway, going back to the review of the book. Yeah, so it was obviously a privilege to play against David, to meet David, because he's a legend of Soviet chess. And in this book, it's mentioned a lot of other legends. I thought an interesting factoid about this book, well, first it also talks about Aliekin, because he competed in one of the first Soviet chess championships. And there's an interesting anecdote where one of the players plays, this is one of the first games that they give, plays against somebody else. Romansky, Levenfish, mentions how he had his conversation with Ilyakin during the game. I believe it's pronounced Ilyakin or Alekhine. That might be the Russian pronunciation, it's Ilyakin. He said, when my opponent fought over the move, I took a walk. Alekhine walked around the hall too. He looked at my game and then walking beside me said, aha, so you're preparing mate on g2. And then later he mentions how he blundered because Alyakin's telling him this. So he assumes it must be correct. Or that's the kind of insinuation of the comment. And he blunders. But obviously now you wouldn't be able to do that, would you? You wouldn't be able to go, oh, you're not really allowed to talk about the games because of all the paranoia about cheating. But also you get this sense from this book that there were personalities in chess that you don't really get now. The people were more interesting. Now people just sit in their hotel rooms, they're drinking orange juice, you know, probably reading Chess Reddit in the background, looking at chess base, you know, they're just obsessed with chess. Like back then there was like a personality behind the moves, you know, the players were fascinating. And that's really what the author's trying to do within the book. Now I do believe that So there's a back here. You can see a picture of the author as well. And I do believe that, so this is like a part of a several volume. Well, there's already a second volume. I don't know if there's going to be a volume after this, because obviously the Soviet Championships does go on until the late 1980s, and then after that was the Russian Chess Championships. I believe Peter Svidler might hold the title for most number of wins in the Russian Chess Championships. People like Karpov probably won the Soviet Championships a lot of times. It's obviously one of the premier national championships. Well, it's probably the premier national championship. I think the only other national championships that would come close to it in terms of the chess history, the quality of players playing in the event, would be the US Championships. Maybe I should do a similar volume on the British Chess Championships, but I'm not sure it would be as popular. So this book gets very highly rated. I mean, obviously it's going to be a good book, right? If the Garry Kasparov is putting the foreword on it, it's not going to be a pile of rubbish. It's got to be a good book, and from what I'm reading so far, it seems to stand up to analysis. It seems to be as good as what people are claiming, and I think what makes the book stand out is what the author sets out to do, which is to talk about the people behind the moves and to talk about, what is sort of hiding behind the play. It's one thing to show the games, but he's really delving into kind of the detail. It's really like a chess history book as well as a normal chess book, and that's what makes it really stand out for me. It's really an outstanding book from what I'm looking at. I would thoroughly recommend it, particularly if you're into history or you're into chess history. I would thoroughly I'm not doing this to try and help Elkan Ruby. I don't work for Elkan Ruby, but I'm being totally objective here. It's clearly an outstanding book. Just generally. I mean, even if you don't play chess, you'd probably be interested in this book because it talks about Russian history. It talks about what was going on in the period. And one of the first things they talk about is how they put this tournament together, which is called like the Soviet Olympiad or Soviet Chess Championships, the first edition. They will even mention this quote by the famous Russian writer Boris Pasternak. In Russia, when you talk about history, you're always alluding to current times, while a historian is a prophet who predicts retrospectively. Yeah, I don't understand that either, to be honest. But yeah, Boris Pasternak. Boris Pasternak? What was he famous for writing? Was it Dr. Zhivago? Did he write Dr. Zhivago? With I think he did actually, right? Made into a famous film with Omar Sharif and Julie Christie and Alec Guinness. Had Lara's theme, right? Julie Christie, beautiful actress. I tried to watch that recently, but got a bit bored. But I'm very interested in Russian history. So I recommend reading this book. I mean, I'll probably find it more interesting reading about normal Russian history than I do reading about Russian chess history. But it's still fascinating. Don't get me wrong. I mean, it's interesting we mentioned David Bronstein. Yeah, one thing actually they do talk about is they demanded not demanded, but asked for a starting fee of 15,000 rubles for the players. Now I looked this up, and 15,000 rubles would probably be worth approximately about £6,000 now. So I could be wrong about that. Somebody else might have a better understanding of what that would be worth in today's money. But 15,000 rubles in the 1920s in Russia might be worth about £6,000 now. So the players of those days were getting more than... So they were like the top players, obviously, of their era, right? In Russia, or in the Soviet Union. And they were getting £6,000. Now, I don't think like a 2700 player, like a bog standard 2700 player, if there is such a thing, would get that kind of money now, so I think it's a reflection, and they were getting win bonuses as well. I think they were getting like game bonuses, win bonuses, for winning games. So you're getting extra rubles for that as well. Like I think maybe 700 rubles for winning a game or something like that. So that was good. Yeah, so I think really you could earn a reasonable living as a Soviet chess grandmaster back in those days. Obviously, the very top players, people like Tigran Petrosian, Vasily Smyslov, Mikhail Botvinnik, they were allowed to travel abroad. This has all been well documented. They had their own dashas, which means a country house in some cases. And yeah, I mean, it's all good, right? I mean, it's a fascinating period of chess history that will probably never be repeated. And but certainly in the Soviet Union, they went out of their way to make chess a reasonable kind of living. They put chess on a pedestal, and now we don't see that same kind of interest in chess anywhere really. You don't really have chess venerated to that extent anywhere else. So that's interesting. Yeah, talking about David Bronstein, he was rumoured, I believe that rumour was unsubstantiated, he was rumoured to be related to the famous Russian revolutionary, somebody might know more about this actually, Trotsky. Because Trotsky's original name was not Trotsky, a bit like Stalin's original name was not Stalin. Stalin's original name was something like Yosef Duganashvili, who's from Georgia originally. But Trotsky's original name, I believe, was something like Lev Davidovich Bronstein, and he was from the Ukraine, because I read a biography about Trotsky. It's very interesting. And he eventually fell out with Stalin, who he was always closely associated with, because Stalin fell out with everybody because he was paranoid. And I think partly because also Trotsky was Jewish, and it was gradually like an increasing Jewish anti-Semitic possible, or maybe it was just the paranoia of Stalin. But anyway, he eventually ended up in Mexico, where he was assassinated. Again, this is all, I believe the guy who was assassinated was called something like Mercado or something like that. He was killed with an ice pick. And then this guy eventually flew to Russia, where he was treated like a hero because he killed somebody. But that was one of the first very famous Soviet political assassinations, which it carries on to this day, with the Putin and the killing the journalists and stuff like that, Litvinenko. But that's an interesting part of history. I mean, I also read about the Nicholas II. Obviously, that preceded. The theory was that Lenin ordered the assassination of Nicholas II, and they ended up in Ekaterinburg. So I think obviously originally they were living in the St. Petersburg in the Winter Palace, and I think that after the Bolshevik Revolution they ended up in Kamysha's house or something. That might have been close to Siberia, or way out to the east anyway. But then they ended up in Ekaterinburg. Maybe that was also in the Urals, I don't know. Or the governor's house in Tobruk, possibly. Anyway, they were killed by somebody called Yuri Yakovich or something like that. Or maybe I'm getting mixed up with a Russian grandmaster. But can anyone tell me there was a particular name of the house that they were killed in? So he had 4 daughters, Tatiana, Olga. I believe Tatiana was the oldest. And then it was Olga, Maria, and Anastasia, who was the Duchess, who was rumoured to be still alive. There were all these rumours about her later on. But I believe the guy who killed him was someone like, or the leader of the gang that killed Nicholas II was someone like Yuri Yakovich. But it's fascinating, yeah, reading about Russian history. I'm fascinated. I read about Rasputin. Obviously, read about Stalin. He was a evil character in many ways. Or a lot of things he did were evil. But a little bit like Hitler, he didn't believe that he was evil, or he didn't go around, I'm really evil. He believed he was doing those things for the right reasons. And it's a fascinating country. I'd like to visit Russia. Hopefully the whole thing will dampen down with what's going on at the moment, and hopefully I can. But yeah, if you want a slice of chess history, I definitely recommend this book. It has got very good reviews. It's not just me who's saying this. Obviously, it has got tremendous reviews. A very good seller, and it mentioned on the book. Oh, it's a 3-volume treatise, yeah. So it will be 3 volumes eventually. If it's not already, it's just going to be like the 3rd volume possibly hasn't been translated or published in English yet. I'm not sure. Vividly Bring, the 2nd volume definitely has. That's also published by Elkin Ruby, of course. Brings to life the long forgotten history of the Soviet championships held in 1920 to 1953. Volume 1 covers the first 10 championships from 1920 to 1937, as well as the title match. So basically saying 3 volumes, and the first volume covers 1920 to 1937. So there's 2 volumes from 1937 to 1953 according to this, which would be, that's quite a lot, isn't it? 2 volumes for quite a short period of time. So he's doing a good job. The key contestants also included world champions Ali Alekhine and challenger, I'm just going to say Bogo. I should know how to pronounce Bogliabov, but it's terrible. I don't even know how to pronounce people like that as names. Lesser known Soviet champions Romanovsky, Bogarchuk, Verlinsky and Rabinovich. There's a fascinating anecdote where they mention this guy, I'm not sure if it's that same Rabinovich, but they mention how he's arranged this wedding. This is the kind of thing that fascinates you when you read the book, when you're reading about these characters. A.I. Rabinovich, again, Jewish names. A lot of chess players were Jewish, certainly from Soviet times. It's actually got a picture of him as well. It's like quite a stern character. It looks like quite a stocky character. And someone you want to meet in a dark alley probably give you a good slap, right? Yeah, a lot of chess players were Jewish and still are. For example, I believe that the first world champion, Wilhelm Steinitz, was also Jewish. He died in New York. And the second world champion, Emanuel Lasker, I believe his brother played chess as well, Edward Lasker, wasn't quite as strong. He was still a very strong player. Emanuel Lasker was also Jewish, and they both died in New York, so that's an interesting anecdote. But, I mean, you look at these games, you think, well, these games are rubbish, these players are old, they're garbage, But actually, those players back then were proper players. Yeah, there's some nice annotations of the games as well. I mean, the actual games themselves, not just the stories. I mean, to be honest with you, this is probably already one of the best chess books ever written. You can check it out yourself. There's no question that it's probably already one of the best chess books ever written. And it's just a fantastic book. So I'd recommend anybody to buy probably both volumes. Just get, especially treat yourself. Christmas is coming around. Get yourself a couple of these for Christmas. I'm certainly going to try and track down the volume 2 at some point. Fascinating stuff, isn't it? And another thing I would also mention, I spent a lot of time reading Douglas Griffin's blog on Soviet chess. That's why I got interested. One of the reasons why I got interested in Soviet chess. But I think everyone's fascinated by Soviet chess. The whole thing about Bobby Fischer overcoming that and beating the whole of the Soviet Union effectively by himself, and all that fascinating period before that, you had all the clashes. Botvinnik had those clashes with Tao, and obviously going further back, you had Alekhine, who not a lot of people realise that he was actually Russian, and so when he died in a hotel room, in Portugal, And that's why they had a World Championship tournament to decide who was going to succeed him, which was won by Mikhail Botvinnik in 1948. I believe that took place in The Hague, which would have been in the Netherlands. And people didn't realise that actually he was actually a Soviet himself. So ironically, even though Mikhail Botvinnik is called the first Soviet world chess champion, you could argue that Alexander Alekhine, although I believe when he won the World Championship he wasn't listed as a Soviet player, he was, ironically, probably the first Soviet world chess champion. Anyway, that's my review of the book. In my opinion, I mean, I don't give scores out of 10, but if I was, this would definitely count as a 10 out of 10, no question. I mean, you would do very well to find a better chess book. It's just an outstanding book. It's one of the best chess books ever written. And even if you don't play chess, like, you would buy this book because it's just such a good book. It's like the chess content is outstanding. The writing is outstanding. It's just a truly outstanding book. And like I say, you know, you could look at these games and say, well, look, these players were quite weak. It doesn't matter. You know, they were stronger than you realise. I mean, they were proper players. They really understood a lot about chess. So yeah, that's my review of it. But I hope you enjoyed the video. Sorry if I rambled on and was very incoherent. It's very typical of my videos, but that was the review. Please leave your comments down below and please subscribe.